I remember the exact moment I realized my parents had abandoned me. It was a sunny Saturday in May, and I sat in my cap and gown on the front row of a crowded auditorium. My heart pounded as the dean called my name and I stepped onto the stage. I scanned the audience, eyes darting across rows filled with proud faces, laughter, and applause. But my parents were nowhere to be found. My grandmother, who had driven me to campus that morning, squeezed my hand as I accepted my diploma. Her smile warm but tinged with worry. I tried to focus on her praise and the roar of the crowd, but a hollow ache settled in my chest as I realized that the two people who should have been there to celebrate me had chosen not to show up. After the ceremony, I wandered through the sea of families gathering around their graduates. Mothers clutched bouquets of flowers, fathers snapped photos, siblings hugged tight. I carried my diploma in one hand and my phone in the other, scrolling through texts I had sent my parents that morning. Can't wait to see you at noon. Don't be late. Love you. Each message stared back at me unanswered. I felt the sting of tears and refused to let them fall. Instead, I stuffed my phone into the pocket of my robe and plastered on a polite smile for the handful of classmates who patted me on the back, offering congratulations and asking where my family was. I left the crowd and slipped behind the auditorium, leaning against a cool brick wall as I leaned my head back. I had dreamed of this moment since I was a kid, practicing my graduation speech in front of my bedroom mirror, imagining the proud faces in the audience, imagining my parents clapping louder than anyone else. Yet here I was, wearing the cap I had decorated with glitter and a message. I did it, Mom and Dad. They had seen that decoration earlier that morning when they dropped me off. They had laughed at it, told me it looked great, and then they drove away. The drive home was a blur. I sat in the passenger seat of my grandmother's car, staring out at the familiar streets of my hometown, the place where I had spent 18 years growing up dreaming of college. Now those streets looked different, tinted by disappointment. My grandmother tried to comfort me, pointing out the old ice cream shop where I had my first day and the park where I played Little League. I nodded but barely heard her. I wondered if my parents had ever sat here, past these landmarks, felt the same pride I was supposed to feel now. When we arrived at my family's house, I pushed open the front door and smelled my mother's favorite lemon cookies baking in the oven. The sight of the kitchen counters dusted with flour and sugar made my heart twist. My father's car was parked in the driveway, but I knew he had been there only to pick up his mail. I walked inside calling out their names, expecting someone to leap out from behind the couch with a camera. But the house was empty. No balloons, no streamers, no congratulations banner. Just the quiet hum of the oven. I placed my diploma on the kitchen table and let my cap fall at my feet. The cookies smelled wonderful, but they felt like a cruel joke. My grandmother, aware that I was trembling, wrapped me in her arms. I let her hold me until my shoulders stopped shaking. Then I pulled away and sat at the table, staring at the blank wall where a banner should have hung. She poured me a glass of lemonade and asked if I wanted to talk. I shook my head and drank, tasting both sweetness and bitterness in every sip. In that moment, I vowed I would never depend on anyone else's approval again. Over the next few days, my phone remained silent. No calls, no texts, no voicemails. My parents didn't respond to emails or letters. I tried to tell myself they were busy, that something must have come up, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been pushed aside. I threw myself into post-graduation plans, job applications, moving arrangements, reconnecting with college friends. Yet every letter I mailed home went unopened, every text ignored. It was as if I no longer existed in their lives. Then one afternoon, a thick envelope arrived addressed to me in my mother's familiar handwriting. I tore it open with trembling fingers and found a short note. "We're sorry we couldn't be there. We love you. Mom and Dad." No explanation. No apology beyond those words. I dropped the note onto my desk and stared at it, feeling more hurt than before. Love without presence felt empty. I folded the note and stuffed it in a drawer, determined never to read it again. I resolved to move forward. I signed a lease on a small apartment in the city, packed my bags, and left my childhood home behind. Graduation became a distant memory, replaced by the busy hum of my new life. Long work days, dinners with friends, weekends exploring my neighborhood. I kept my parents at arm's length, replying to their occasional texts with polite but brief messages. I no longer invited them to anything. No longer expected anything from them. Life settled into a new rhythm. And I began to heal. I found joy in my work and laughter in my new circle of friends. Each milestone, my first paycheck, decoration of my apartment, purchase of my first car felt like a victory I had achieved on my own. I built a life that no longer depended on their approval or presence. And in that independence, I found strength, yet I never forgot the emptiness I felt on graduation day. It left a scar that couldn't fully heal. I wondered if they regretted their choice or if they simply didn't care enough to reconsider. I tried to push those thoughts aside and focus on the future, but a small part of me remained on that stage. Diploma in hand, looking out into an empty audience. That image haunted me in quiet moments, reminding me that the people I had counted on above all had let me down in the moment I needed them most. A year passed since I signed the lease on my small apartment in the city and settled into a routine that felt like mine alone. Mornings began with the smell of fresh coffee drifting through my living room as I watched sunlight creep across the hardwood floors. Work consumed my weekdays and weekends filled with brunches with friends or solo trips to the bookstore down the street. I learned to love the hum of the city, the constant motion that left no space for loneliness. I collected my favorite coffee, cups like trophies, each one reminding me of a milestone I reached on my own. My parents existed only as a name on my phone, their occasional texts polite but distant. I answered when I chose and ignored whenever I felt the cold sting of their absence. Then, one crisp autumn afternoon, the call came. My manager handed me a slip of paper with my sister's lawyer's number. My heart seized the instant I saw her name, and I felt a tremor run through my chest that had nothing to do with caffeine. I stared at the phone for a long moment before dialing. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Marjorie Ellis, estate attorney, and told me she had some difficult news. My sister Emily had passed away unexpectedly in her sleep. The world tilted, and I gripped the phone as if it might slip from my hand. I blinked twice, and the office around me seemed to blur. I excused myself, telling my boss I needed a moment, and fled to the nearest stairwell. My legs felt weak as I sank to the bottom step, the phone still clutched against my cheek. Why Emily? She was only 24, the baby of the family, always brimming with laughter and light. Memories flooded in. Her dancing around the living room when we were kids, her whispered secrets I kept tucked in my diary. I felt tears well up but held them back, not sure I had the strength to weep. In the quiet of that stairwell, I realized how fragile everything was, how swiftly life could reroute our plans. Marjorie's voice crackled through the receiver, listing details I could barely process. There would be a will reading next week at our parents' house. Attendance was optional but recommended. My throat tightened at the thought of stepping back into that house, the house where I had set down my diploma and never returned. I felt a surge of anger. They had abandoned me on my graduation day, and now, when it mattered most, they expected me to come running to hear about my sister's estate. They wanted me to attend a ceremony for my own flesh and blood, and I wasn't sure I could bring myself to do it. I ended the call and stayed in the stairwell until the pounding in my chest slowed. I wiped my damp palms on my trousers and stood, feeling hollow. When I returned to my desk, my coworkers stared, but I managed a weak smile and told them I had a family emergency. They offered condolences, and I nodded numbly. I left work early and walked aimlessly until the city lights blurred around me. I found myself back at the bookstore, and I ran my fingers along the spines of books I had once loved. Emily would have been here too, picking up the latest novel she intended to devour in a single night. I closed my eyes and pictured her curled up on my couch, a mug of cocoa in her hands, arguing over which character would survive. I blinked and the reverie shattered. By the time I returned to my apartment, night had fallen. The elevator ride up felt suffocating, giving me too much time to ponder family, loss, and the invitation I hadn't decided whether to accept. I paced my living room, clutching my phone, and stared at a photo of Emily taped to the fridge above my coffee maker. The photo was from her graduation, her face alight with excitement. She had graduated 2 years before me but still attended my ceremony because our parents had finally showed up. They clapped proudly, tears in their eyes. I remembered standing beside her that day, smiling even though I felt jealous of her connection to them. That memory now felt like a cruel twist of fate. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table, the glow of a single lamp painting long shadows across the room. I drafted and deleted messages to my parents, alternating between fury and sorrow. I considered writing to Emily, leaving a voicemail, burying my grief in a letter she would never read. Morning arrived gray and cold, and I realized I had to decide. Should I return to the house where I had felt so unwanted? Should I face my parents in the aftermath of Emily's death? The thought was unbearable, yet I felt an obligation, a final piece of family duty I couldn't deny. When the day of the will reading arrived, I stood in my bedroom staring at my reflection. I chose a simple black dress and a light jacket, trying to look composed. My grandmother offered to drive me, the same woman who had sat beside me at my graduation when my parents did not. She didn't ask questions, just gave me a gentle nod, and handed me her keys. The drive home felt both familiar and alien. As we turned onto our old street, the houses looked smaller, the trees taller. My grandmother reached over and squeezed my hand. I took a steadying breath and stepped out of the car. I walked up the front steps of the house where I grew up, the wood creaking under my weight. The door was slightly ajar, and I pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled of lavender and old books. Portraits of Emily and me lined the hallway, younger versions of ourselves captured in happier times. I swallowed hard and stepped into the living room, where a small group had gathered: family, friends, a handful of neighbors, and my parents standing stiffly by the fireplace. My mother's eyes were red, her lipstick smudged. My father's arms were crossed, his expression unreadable. My heart lurched as I realized the next moments would define so much of our shared past and whatever future we might muster. I stepped further into the living room and felt every eye turn in my direction as the attorney cleared her throat and motioned for silence. My grandmother remained beside me like a steady anchor while I walked past family friends who offered gentle nods and strangers who whispered condolences. My parents stood near the fireplace, looking older than they had at my graduation and more vulnerable than I had ever allowed myself to see them. My mother's shoulders shook slightly as tears rolled down her cheeks, and my father's jaw tightened as he avoided my gaze. I carried a small leather portfolio containing Emily's final wishes, and I held it close to my chest as if it might shield me from the pain of that room. The mist of grief hovered heavy in the air, but beneath it I felt a strange current of anticipation as I braced myself to hear my sister's voice again in her own words. The attorney opened the portfolio and began to speak in a measured tone, telling us that Emily had requested this reading and that no one should interrupt so the wishes she penned would remain intact. Silence settled, and I leaned forward as she read in clear voice that Emily had set aside a modest sum from her savings to establish a scholarship fund in her name at our childhood high school. My breath caught when I heard the details of how she wanted the fund to support students who demonstrated kindness in everything they did and who overcame adversity with grace. The attorney continued reading that Emily had also left personal mementos to each of us, including letters she wrote in her delicate handwriting. My grandmother wiped her eyes, and I felt my own tears gather as I anticipated the moment my name would be announced. Each word the attorney read felt like I was listening to my sister speak directly to my heart one last time. When the attorney paused, I stepped forward with trembling fingers and accepted the first envelope addressed to me. My grandmother squeezed my shoulder as I broke the seal and withdrew a single sheet of paper. The lawyer gestured for me to read aloud, and I felt my voice tremor against the hush of the room. The letter began with Emily calling me her hero and thanking me for always protecting her. She recalled memories of our shared room and her first day at school when I held her hand to calm her fears. Her words were earnest and warm and carried all the love she had felt for me in her short life. As I read, she described how proud she was of everything I had become and how she wished I would never lose faith in myself. I paused when I reached the last line where she wrote she believed our family would heal and that I had the power to lead us there. A hush enveloped the room as I folded the letter and returned it to its envelope. I looked up at my parents and saw that my mother had buried her face in her hands and my father's lips were pursed in a tight line. Anger and sorrow collided in my chest, but before I could speak the attorney continued the reading, revealing that the remainder of Emily's savings were to be divided equally among her siblings, and that she had requested a small portion be used to cover the cost of planting a magnolia tree in our front yard as a living memorial. I felt a surge of relief when I learned that our childhood home would always bear a living tribute to her spirit, but I also sensed the invitation to participate in a ritual of healing. My grandmother reached for my hand, and I felt a spark of warmth pass between us. After the reading, the attendees offered their condolences and drifted slowly out of the house, leaving only our family and a few close friends behind. The sky outside had darkened and the streetlights cast long patterns across the living room floor. My parents sank onto the couch on either side of my grandmother, and I sat in an armchair nearby, feeling like an outsider and a guardian all at once. My father looked at me and in an unsteady voice apologized for not being there on my graduation day, admitting that he and my mother had been caught up in their own troubles and had failed me when I needed them most. My mother wept as she spoke of her regret and her fear that she had lost both of her children. I listened with a conflicted heart and realized that Emily's death had cracked open their hearts in ways nothing else could. I looked at my grandmother and felt her strength in her hand. My parents watched me in silence, and I took a breath and spoke with calm that I needed distance but was ready to begin rebuilding our relationship. I told my mother that missing my graduation had left a hurt that words alone could not heal. I told my father that I needed actions more than promises. My voice shook as I shared these truths, and I saw tears well in their eyes. In that moment, I realized that this exchange was the first step toward redefining our family bond.